Hello guys, and welcome to my beginner hybrid build video for the Elder Scrolls Online. This is a build that can do everything, guys. If you've ever jumped into Elder Scrolls and felt that you just wanted to be able to pick up a staff and be effective with it, pick up a sword and be effective with it, and all you have to worry about is leveling up your skill line with that weapon, this is the build for you. It can do absolutely everything. You can put this build on any class, you can use any weapons with it, and you can use any abilities that you want on it. This is a very beginner-friendly build. You will easily be able to complete all beginner content with this build. 1 to 50 content will be no trouble at all, and you can do multiple roles with it. You can switch on the fly. Just being able to switch your weapons out on the fly is really the advantage of being able to play all the different roles on this build. And then on top of it, this build is fantastic for PvP. It is kind of a PvP spec. It's modeled after my max level hybrid PvP specs that I do. So with a quick trait change, this build will be absolutely fantastic for PvP as well. Now, this build does have one downside, guys, and it is that you do have to get someone to craft it for you because you're not going to be able to build this thing by yourself at the beginning of the game. That being said, it will not cost you a ton of gold to put this build together. If you go all out and go for the purple spec, you will pay at most 20 to 30k for this build, and if you just go for the blue gear and the blue spec, you will pay 10k or less for this build, which is easily able, that's an easy amount of money for you to get at the early stages of the game just by selling the things that you get as you play. So guys, we're going to jump into the video and I'm going to show you how I got these stats and how we got the low-level hybrid to be so effective without any champion points or anything on a brand new fresh character. And finally, if you guys want to try this build out for yourselves, just give the crafter that you're getting to make the gear a link to this video, and it's that simple. They can just watch it, make the gear for you, and you don't even have to tell them that part. Alright guys, so let's take a look at the build. So taking a peek at our stat page here, you can see that we are a Nord Templar. Now, as I had mentioned, you can pick any class for this build, guys. This is simply a beginner hybrid build, and you can do anything with it. And I cannot stress that enough with this build. It's literally designed for you to play however you want. You find a staff you like, you pick up that staff, and you use it effectively. You find a sword you like, you pick up that sword, and you use it effectively. This is what unlocks the real Elder Scrolls experience, in my opinion. So without further ado, let's take a look at the stat page. We have got pretty interesting max stat spread, 20k, 20k. This is what you want to see on a hybrid, around 20k of both your max pools. Absolutely ideal. Taking a look at the regen side of things, we've got 1600 magicka and stamina recovery. That's perfect. I mean, that's exactly what we want on the hybrid, is both recoveries coming in at 1500 plus. This is going to allow you to have lots of sustain on this build. Our health recovery is not super crazy, but we don't focus a lot on it for this build, so it's not a big deal. The max health is coming in at just under 17k. We are outside of PvP, so in a PvP zone, we would actually have 23 to 24k hit points on this build, so we'd have a lot more HP if we were in PvP. And our physical spell resistance is pretty standard for medium armor, but that weapon and spell damage coming in at 4,149, 4,151 unbuffed. It's strange that these values are different. They shouldn't be for a Pelinal's build. When we buff up with our potion, we get up to almost 5k, and if we go and we swing and hit a mob, we will fully buff with our infused weapon. And here you guys can see it, 5,600 weapon and spell damage on the low-level hybrid build. And this is with no CP. We have no champion points on this build. This is purely a beginner build, and yeah, pretty impressive statistics on it for a hybrid, I think. So if we take a look at the Mundus that we're running, we have the Warrior Mundus on this build, and it gives us a massive amount of weapon damage. So the Warrior Mundus is important because this will increase our weapon damage, which gets copied over into spell damage through the sets that we're wearing, and we'll take a peek at those sets in just a second. And for the drink that we're using, you want to go with the Magicka and Stamina Recovery drink. This is a super easy drink to get your hands on early on in the game. And it's cheap to buy, it's cheap to make. The recipe to make this drink is like 10 gold to buy it, and the drink itself to buy is like 2 gold. So it's very, very cheap to get. This is by no means difficult, and it gives you 500 of each recoveries, almost. Very nice. This is perfect for the hybrid build. We need both recoveries so we can keep ourselves alive and keep dealing damage. All right, so let's take a look at the gear that we're using to get this fantastic hybrid build. So to start off with, we are running the Pelinal's Aptitude set. This is a very important set for hybrids. I would say it is the most important set in the game for hybrids because it really is what unlocks hybrid builds in ESO. So this set is quite simple. You get some max health, both of your recoveries. The 5-piece, your weapon and spell damage become the highest of the two values. So whichever one is the highest value gets copied over onto the other. So the way that this hybrid build works is we just stack weapon damage on it, and we copy that weapon damage over into spell damage, and it's that simple. This set does that for us, and then the rest of the build is just stacking weapon damage. Very straightforward. So we've got our Pelinals on our helmet here, and then we've got it in our gear as well. So you can see that the Pelinals is in the worn armor. In the Summerset patch, jewelry crafting is a new crafting that is coming, and you do need jewelry crafting to make this build. So you don't actually want to get Pelinals jewelry because it's a 9-trait set. You do want to go for the Shacklebreaker jewelry on this build, and that's simply because the Shacklebreaker, as a 6-trait set, it'll be a lot easier for you to find someone who can actually make you the jewelry. Trying to find someone, especially early on in this patch, who has 9-trait crafting and jewelry is going to be very difficult, but finding someone who has 9-trait crafting in the gear here is not hard at all. A lot of players have this because the other crafts have been out for a long time now. So that's something I did want to mention for the Pelinals gear, is that you want it in your armor and not in your jewelry. So the second set that we're running on this build is Shacklebreaker, and Shacklebreaker is a fantastic set for a hybrid because it gives us all stats all around. Now, I did say that you do want to stack weapon damage with this build, but Shacklebreaker is actually the best set to pair it with, especially at low levels, because of just how much stat you get from Shacklebreaker, because it's already a dual set. So the Shacklebreaker is worn on our belt and our chest here, and then we have Shacklebreaker in the jewelry as well. And the Shacklebreaker jewelry is like I had mentioned, a lot easier to get than the Pelinals, especially when this crafting comes out. Not a lot of people are going to have 9-trait early on, but 6-trait is something that people are going to be a lot easier, are going to have a lot easier time getting. For the enchantments on the jewelry, you really want to go with the weapon damage enchants that we have here. It's very important to have that max weapon damage. Like I had mentioned, it's going to get copied over into spell damage, so it's important to have this. And when the person goes and makes you this jewelry, it's also very important that every single piece is infused. This is just going to make the weapon damage enchant that you put on here stronger, and it's going to allow the infused jewelry, or it's going to allow that extra weapon damage to be copied over into spell damage as well. So this is super pivotal to making the Pelinal set effective on a hybrid build. For the gear, guys, you want to go with full divines if you're not going to PvP. If you are going to PvP, you want to do 4 well-fitted and 3 impenetrable. The impenetrable is going to prevent you from taking a lot of critical damage, and the well-fitted is going to help your stamina sustain by allowing you to roll a lot more. But if you're not going to PvP, you don't really have to worry about that aspect defensively too much, so you can just go with full divines, and this is just going to up the amount of weapon damage that the warrior Mundus gives you, making your Pelinal's build hit harder and harder. For the enchants on the gear, guys, you want to go with a mix of maximum magicka and maximum stamina enchants. You don't want to go with any health enchants on this build. I say a mix of max mag, max sam because you want to try to even out your attributes. As you can see on my front page here, I've got about 20k of each pool, and you want to aim to have both these pools about even, and this is just going to ensure that you deal even amounts of damage with both your magicka and your stamina. Because our weapon and spell damage is cranked up so high, you don't have to worry that you're hurting your damage by evening these pools out. It's totally okay. This is how a Pelinal's build functions. You want to try to equal these pools out if you can. So the way that I've done it for the enchants is I went with maximum magicka on 2 big pieces, and then 1 max magicka on a little piece, and then I went with max stam on 3 little pieces, and then max stam on 1 big piece, and this gives you about equal attributes of both, and saves you having to spend a lot of money on the very expensive tri-stat glyphs. All you're missing out on here is the max health, which you actually, I don't think, need for this build anyway, so it's totally fine. So let's take a look at the weapons that we're using. And the weapons is something I wanted to mention specially for this build because I know this is a build that people are going to be playing early on. They're going to want to level up with it, etc. So part of the deal is that I didn't actually include any big sets in the weapons. And that's because this is an open build. I mean, I'm advertising this build as pick up a staff, pick up a sword, and be effective with it. Well, in order for that to work, you have to be able to pick up a staff or a sword that's not part of a crafted set that you already had. So ideally, ideally what you want here is a weapon that has a 2-piece weapon damage. In the Summerset patch, a 2-handed weapon will count as 2 pieces, so you can easily get that weapon damage on anything. There are tons of different sets in the game that have weapon damage as the first 2-piece in them, so as you play, when you find that 2-piece weapon damage weapon, that'll be a weapon that you can potentially use on your hybrid. That being said, you don't have to have this 2-piece here. You will lose out on some weapon damage if you don't have it, but it's not a huge amount and your build will still function very well without it, so you don't have to fret. But that's something I did want to mention, is that I left this open on purpose so that if you wanted to play this build a little bit more loosely and just use whatever skills you wanted and pick up weapons as you go, you have the option of doing that due to the weapon only being a small set in itself. Now, if you're going to go and get the weapons crafted for yourself, they'll be much more effective and you will deal more damage than if you just pick up random weapons. And the traits that I would recommend that you do is an infused weapon. Now, ideally on a hybrid, you go for a Nirnhoned weapon, but that is very expensive, and this is a beginner build, and that's not something that we want on a beginner build, is something expensive like that. Infused is an excellent alternative for an early game hybrid because it's going to give you access to that weapon spell damage enchant that can bulk up your outgoing weapon and spell damage by a huge amount. Look at that, 538 increased weapon spell damage. And the infused also reduces the cooldown on it, so you have this extra buff up at almost all times while you're actively in combat. So this is a really good way to put kind of a cheap alternative to the damage on the hybrid. Now, I'm level 10 right now, so I haven't unlocked weapon swap. When I get to level 15 and unlock weapon swap, I will be able to run infused on one set of weapons, and that'll open up me being able to run precise or sharpened on my other bar, and those traits are going to increase my outgoing damage, and as long as I'm swapping between the weapons and actively using the infused one, I'll still have that buff up on both bars. Now, if you do have the weapon swap, I would recommend that you go with Precise if you want to focus on damage and healing, and if you want to focus purely on outgoing damage, put Sharpened on your front bar. But if you're only level 10 and you only have one bar, Infused is the first one you want to go with. And then also as well, once you use two weapons, you want to make your ranged weapon infused for the most part. Now, that's not a necessity, but it's just easier for you to keep that infused buff up if it's on a ranged weapon, because you'll be landing more attacks with it than a melee weapon. Okay guys, and finally I am going to talk a little bit about the skills on this build, and like I had mentioned at the beginning of the video, I am advertising this build as an any skills, any class build, and I mean it when I say that. You can use any abilities on this build, any class that you want. It's an open-ended hybrid build, so you can seriously just play whatever you want with it. Get really creative with the weapons you use. Just have fun, guys. Oh, gonna do a little bit of damage to this guy here. So some things I did want to mention is that you do want to have access to Major Brutality on this build, and that's going to give you a bonus to your weapon damage, which is going to buff your spell damage as well. A question I get a lot on Hybrid Pelinals builds is, if I have Major Brutality and Major Sorcery, which is both the weapon and the spell damage buffs, will that stack my weapon and spell damage higher on Pelinals? The answer is no, it will not. The amount of weapon damage that you have determines what your spell damage becomes. So if you have the spell damage buff, it buffs your base value spell damage, which is only going to be like 2,000. So it'll buff that up to like 2,300, and then that'll just get overridden by your weapon damage value anyway. So the only important buff that you really need is the Major Brutality buff. That being said, you can get that buff through potions, so you don't actually need to run a skill to get access to it. These potions can be tricky to get early on in the game. I find the easiest way to get a Major Brutality potion is to buy it from the PvP vendors. If you just go do some PvP, you can go to any PvP shop at a castle or keep, and the vendor there will sell you potions that give you Major Brutality. So that is a really easy way for you to get access to this. Like I had mentioned, this is like a PvP build if you want it to be. It's very good for PvP, so that's a great way for you to have constant potions for your build. But yeah, ability-wise and weapon-wise, you guys can be 100% creative. Just have fun, pick whatever you want, see what synergizes well, see what you like, see what you don't like. Really just enjoy it. That's kind of the whole point of this build for you newer players, is to just be able to do whatever you want. So there you go. And then finally, guys, I did want to talk a little bit about the different foods that you can run. Like I had mentioned, we are using the recovery drink here, and this is the best all-around drink, I think, for this build, because it is the easiest to get, and it gives you a lot of regen, which is just going to help you play more and have more access to actually using your character, using your abilities, instead of just being out of resources. You can use alternative foods, though. If you want to have more HP, for example, Jewels of Misrule is a good alternative. It'll give you a big max health bonus, as well as still giving you a lot of that recovery as well. So that's a great alternative to it. Jewels of Misrule, of course, is going to be a little bit more expensive. And you could alternatively go for something like the Candied Jester's Coins. Because this is a build that you are supposed to play in medium armor, Candied Jester's Coins is going to give you that Magicka recovery and max stam, so you can easily even out your max stamina and your max Magicka using your attribute points, and then when it comes to the Magicka recovery, that'll provide for that Magicka dump that you need. Now, the Candied Jester's Coins is a good alternative food if you want to have a little bit more damage and a little less regen on this spec, but I would not recommend using this food until you have a few of your medium armor passives to help make up for the fact that you won't have as much stamina recovery if you run this. And I did want to show you guys a few variations of the spec to show you the different maxes in stats between, for example, blue gear and purple gear, because I know that purple gear at a low level isn't necessarily something that people may be able to get their hands on. That being said, this build should not cost more than around 30k for you to set up, and for a full build, you know, even a beginner build, like 30k is not so bad. It's going to get you through 10 levels at least, and you can keep going for more levels after that if you really want to. It's kind of up to you if how often you want to upgrade your gear. But I did want to show you guys the stats in blue gear to show you that you can do this build in blue gear, and you won't be missing out as huge in stats, or super huge in stats, if you decide to go this route. As you can see, our max stats, max Magicka health, stamina, and our recoveries are about the same. They're just a few % short of what they were before, so not a huge change here, but we see the big difference in the weapon damage. So when we fully buff for the weapon damage in the blue gear, and I just gotta smack this mob right here, we see that our weapon damage actually goes up to 5k, so it's actually quite a bit lower. We lose out on about 600 weapon and spell damage, so the difference between blue and purple gear on this build is about a 8% damage and healing increase. So it is a bit of a difference, but it's not so massive that you won't be able to function this in blue. It'll work perfectly fine in blue gear, but if you do want to be as competitive as possible, for example, jump into PvP, I would recommend that you try to purple the gear out. Don't gold this build out. I would not gold this build out unless you are a lover of Kaine's Kiss PvP and you want to have a level 45 hybrid, you know, gold set of gear for characters that you level up just to play in PvP at the low level. Then you can gold it out, but I would highly recommend that you wait until you're max level and have CP 160 gear, and then when you want to play a max level hybrid, you gold that bad boy out. This is a good build, don't get me wrong, but this is not going to be as strong as a max level build. A big part of it is that we don't have any CP on this build. I didn't include the CP because it's a beginner build. Beginners will not have access to champion points, so why include it in the build, you know? But anyway, guys, I did want to show you guys the stats there, and I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to give it a like, and feel free to hit that subscribe button if you guys like this content and want to see more of it from me. I really hope that this gets newer players into hybrids, and maybe just newer players into ESO that have felt like they were limited by the fact that, you know, Buildcraft was kind of complex, and you couldn't just pick up a staff and be effective with it. But this is a build where you actually can just go do any weapons you want, use whatever you want, and I think that that's something that the ESO audience has been yearning for over the years, and the Summerset patch finally delivers it to us. I did want to mention that I do live stream on Twitch, so if you guys want to come chat Buildcraft with me, just watch me play. I love to PvP, or, you know, just come hang out and chill. You can come visit me on the Twitch stream. The link to that, of course, is in the description. And finally, we are sponsored by What the Fast. They are a VPN for gamers, so if you guys get crap ping to your favorite games, and maybe you wanted to get better ping to your favorite game, a VPN might be what you need. So if you guys want to give the VPN a shot, it is free to try, and the link, of course, to that is in the description. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and have a fantastic day. I'll see you next time.